Go out in the winter and you pick Iris unguicularis, Mary Bernard or Walter Butt, and you can watch the buds unfurl as you have a cup of tea in your warm kitchen.
I love that my dog's jumped onto my lap and she can clearly see, I think she can see the postman out of the window.
She certainly looks interested. I don't think it's us. I'm very, very fond of these winter flowering clematis, and this is actually freckles. They're quite pendant, these bells, so you need to go to look up to them. The reason I love it is because it's always out in November. This is an Alan Gray version of Clematis cirosa.
Hello and welcome to Talking Dirty episode 23. Over at East Ruston Old Vicarage, looking a little bit like he's glowing as an ember in a fire in orange, is Alan Edward Herbert Gray, our happy and ever more handsome horticulturalist.
Well, thank you very much and good morning to you too. Over in Cambridgeshire, I have to say, a most alluring jumper, which has something up its sleeve. In the pom-poms, can you see them? His daughter's Maria Sophia Friedrichsen.
Waggling my pom-poms, and I wore this as a nod to a Christmas jumper, but also because you bought this for me one Christmas. So
yes, I did.
I wanted to get my pom-poms out.
How crazy was that?
And joining us,
good job, I know you well.
Yes, joining us for our final podcast before Christmas and in full festive swing is Tamsin Westhorpe. Are you happy to share a middle name with us?
Oh yes, Mary. Can't stand it, but it's very suitable, isn't it, for festivities?
Very Christmassy.
Exactly.
Well, I like Mary, quite contrary. How does your garden grow? It's kind of apt.
Yes, and I love the fact that Alan's middle name is Herbert, because I called my son Herbert and everyone was horrified by it, but I love it. And he gets called Herb, Herbie, Herbaceous, all those things. So
yeah, well, that's good. That's good. I have to say, I hated it for a long, long time when I was growing up, and I was, you felt self-conscious about such things. But then you get to the stage in your life and you just think, what the heck? Who cares?
Just embrace it. Now,
absolutely.
Tamsin, you have so many hats, so many accolades. I've just written them all down. It's like an entire paragraph in my notebook. So we have RHS chair, co-chair of the Garden Media Guild, director of Stockton Gardens, obviously, in Herefordshire, host as well of Candy's Fresh from the Pod podcast. So a very successful podcaster as well. And I think the first podcaster to appear on our little podcast.
Oh, well, that's rather good fun. I like that.
But of course, we also know you as the writer of a rather fabulous new book, which is how come you came up on the podcast and why I fired off an email to you to invite you along. And there it is. Look at that.
I was so thrilled. It was so exciting to hear Alan, of all people, talking about my little book. It was, really exciting, fantastic.
Well, somebody said to me the other day on some kind of media thing, well, surely you don't need to read a book like this. And the answer is yes, I do. Because not only does it, it reminds me of lots of the things. I mean, for instance, I think you replied to me this on Twitter about this, Tamsin. It reminded me to cut down hazels,
yes,
which I haven't done for several years, and I've got them, so it's silly not to make use of them. But it's also, it's like a kindred spirit talking to another kindred spirit in a funny sort of way. It's very silly in some ways, but I feel now as if I know you, although we've not met. And it was simply due to a few words on these pages here. It's been my bedtime reading for such a few weeks now. I don't spend a lot of time reading in bed, but there it is. I'm nearly at the end.
It's been absolutely lovely, because this was a book that sort of happened by mistake. And I think why I love it so much is because I wasn't told to write it. I wasn't commissioned to write it. I just started writing it at the potting bench at Stockton. When I'm waiting for people to come in, I just jot a few notes down, and because I always think I'm never going to remember what happened when and the weather, etc. And I was working for a local publisher, helping them with another book, sort of PRing another book, and they said, have you ever written a book? And I went, well, no, I've written hundreds of articles and I'm writing a silly diary. And she said, oh, let me have a read. And she said, I love it, keep going. So that was just magical. and they're a small publisher, and they really just let me. It's so my voice. So many of my friends say, "Gosh, I can hear you talking to me." You know, it hasn't been sort of really edited, or you know, it's just me and my notes, which I think that's what we all need. And I think during this lockdown, people have sort of loosened up about gardening, and you just say it how you do it, and you know, there's no wrong or right way, really, is there?
No, there isn't. But I tell you what it does to me. It is your voice speaking to me, to us, to everybody that buys your book or is lucky enough to receive it as a Christmas present, because it's going to make a wonderful Christmas present this year, I think. And I think the other thing that it reminds me of visiting a garden when the garden is gardened by the owners. You know, you can tell, you can sort of feel the kind of, if I say love, that sounds soppy, but you know what I mean? You can feel the person coming through that's telling the tale or making the garden. And I think that it shows enormously.
Yeah, and I think what I'm really passionate about, and I'm sure you've come across this, Alan, is do people really know what it involves to open a garden? And I think they don't. You know, we have people arrive and say, "Oh, I'm not paying to walk around a garden." You know, you do get those sort of comments. And it's like having a dagger thrown at you, isn't it? Or at the beginning of the season, April. I love this. This happens every year, I guarantee you. We open on April the 1st, and people will arrive and they'll get to the entrance and they'll say, "Oh, well, of course, Tamsin, you know, Happy New Year, but we won't be coming around the garden yet because it's far too early." And you think, you've spent 6 months weeding it. There's so much spring interest. And they go and have a piece of cake, which is great. But I mean, I don't get this not going around a garden until May and June. And people want a garden to remain in the summer season all year.
But, you know, opening a garden, it is one of those things that you get the whole time is, well, I thought 10 quid was a bit steep to go in there, but I've had a lovely afternoon, thank you. You know, that's the kind of thing that happens here quite often. And I think the other thing is that, I don't know, we all see things in different ways, don't we? And there are, I mean, we have season ticket holders here, and some of them come every week, some of them come once every month or something like that, but they come periodically throughout the season. The season ticket is roughly 3 times the cost of an entrance. So, you know, 3 to 4 times and you're in profit, and people like a profit, don't forget that.
They do.
They do. But, you know, you have to rise above all of this and these silly comments and everything. And Jill, that's absolutely fine. But we'll look forward to seeing you as and when you decide that you can spare the time to come into the garden. If you can say it with a little bit of a barb, it gives you an enormous amount of...
My uncle is really good at it. And I think, damn it, why didn't I come back with that? It's experience. I'll get there in the end. I'm far too polite. I need to, but I mean, on the flip side, oh gosh, we have some really quite moving things happen when you open a garden. And having not been open, you realise that we're worried about some of our visitors, because you think, oh gosh, I wonder how so-and-so is. Are they still well? Are they still alive? Will they be coming back? You know, we get really connected to people. And one, you know, a couple of things that have really pleased me a few years ago, a guy turned up, a young guy, and he was quite a dude. And I thought, oh, what's he doing here? This is good. We're lowering our average age. And he was carrying a guitar. And I thought, oh gosh, what's happening here? And he said, would you mind if I just sat in the garden and quietly played my guitar? And I thought, how blooming fabulous. You know, I thought that was just great. And then I have another woman that comes in, and she's great, larger than life, comes in and takes her shoes off and puts them on my potting bench and walks off into the garden barefoot. And I love that. We need that. That's great. So I'm all for these quirky people that use the garden in a different way.
It's not just quirky people that use the garden in a different way, because so many people I've noticed, they come and they're not that interested perhaps in the garden. They tell themselves maybe they are, but it is the snoop factor. I mean, it's the fact that they want to see what you've got, how you live, how you dress. If they can get a quick look through your windows, if the curtains are drawn back, and you know, just see what you've got in the house and everything else, it's wonderful. I mean, I have enormous fun when people walk past the orangery, no curtains, but they can see through the windows into the kitchen beyond that. And I stand still in the kitchen and they can't see me. The moment I move, you should see them shoot away from the window and point down at the floor as if they're looking at something, you know, entirely different. But we're all guilty of it. We all do it.
Yeah,
I mean, I think that's the great thing.
I think you're right. Thordis is thinking, my goodness, I didn't know there was so much to this opening garden lark. But when we first opened the garden, I mean, I was a young person then, and my grandmother lived in the house, and my uncle opened the garden, and she wasn't allowed to hang washing on the line. I remember vividly the arguments, like, oh, for goodness sake, I need to dry my clothes. And it was like, no, with the chickens weren't allowed anymore to wander in the garden. The other things that happened were we would be having Sunday lunch as a family, and then you'd see all these faces at the window, like you say, peering in. It's a mad thing to do, really, isn't it? But, you know, we obviously love it. We would, yeah, exactly.
I do love the idea of people attempting to emulate how you dress, though, Alan. I should let them know it is inimitable. They're not going to have much luck with that.
No, but I mean, they could choose to be entirely different, couldn't they? And you know, drape themselves in sackcloth and ashes with, I don't know, a few flowers in the hair or something stupid.
Give themselves the pom-poms. Obviously, loads of people listening to this will know all about your garden, Tamsin. But for those who are, you know, scattered all over the world, or maybe, you know Alan's garden very well in Norfolk, but haven't been over to Herefordshire, paint a picture for us. Tell us a bit about it. Obviously, there's a huge amount of family history tied into it.
Yeah.
Alluded to.
Can I ask first of all one thing, Tamsin? What's your rainfall? Your annual rainfall?
Oh gosh, I've never measured it, but it's massive. We just have far too much rain. It's sodden, and we're on clay, so yes, it's definitely, we're not short of rain. But the garden's been in my family since about 1886, when my great grandfather, he was a tenant farmer, and it was part of the Berrington Hall estate, which you can still visit, which is over the road from us, which is National Trust, and that was owned by Lord Rodney, and he was a bit of a gambler. And I think he had to sell off farms quick. So my great-great-grandfather rushed to the Green Dragon in Hereford to put a bid in on the farm when he was only a sort of mere tenant farmer. And I think because it was so desperate to get some coffers in the bank, he managed to get the farm. So that was fantastic. So that's how we ended up there. But the interesting thing about Stocktonbury, we've got a 400-acre farm, and the garden's at the heart of it. And it was a monastic farm. So we've got some lovely things like a dovecot, a tithe barn. It's got some really historic buildings. The lovely thing is that the garden actually is new. It's really my uncle and his partner, Raymond and Gordon. They've created the garden. Originally, there was just a main lawn that my great-great-grandfather put down. He planted a monkey puzzle tree as a status symbol, I think. It's like, hello, I'm here, that tree is. But it's really my uncle, Raymond, and his partner, Gordon, who have created the garden in my lifetime. It was just a big vegetable patch before, lots of potatoes, nothing decorative at all. So they are the plantsmen. They've really gone for it. And they were very, very friendly with Christopher Lloyd and Beth Chatto. And they've just had great fun. And they've created a garden that they love, we all love. And it was never intended to open. There's some quite quirky little features in it. And I think that's why it works, because it's, you know, Alan will know this, your garden is yours. You know, we're not creating a sort of a parkland. We're creating, or we're looking after somebody's home and somebody's passion. So that's really where the garden comes from. And I would describe it as a plantsman's garden. It's a collection of all the things that they've found along their way. And it's funny now, because I've joined them. I go to shows and I come back with a plant and go, oh, and they say, oh, you idiot, you silly girl, it won't grow here, you know. And I think, but I need to find out for myself. So it's quite funny that we sort of I'm going over old ground with them. They're very tolerant of me, because they must think, oh, you're wasting your time with that. But, it's gardening, isn't it? It's what we all do.
Yes.
It's interesting that we had Val on, and she obviously knows so many of the stories behind plants. Val Bourne knows the sort of the history behind them. And obviously the stories that plants tell, some of them are, their discovery and that kind of side of things, but also there's the personal stories. Has your uncle, have they managed to kind of pass those stories down to you, where the plants come from? Have you got all of that stored up in your brain?
Yeah, it's quite difficult because they don't mention it, and then a couple of years later they'll say, oh yes, when we got that from Dixter, and you think, why didn't you tell me that? I mean, there's a hilarious story about a euphorbia Dixter, which we've got lots of in the garden, and Gordon was saying to me that Christo gave them a piece, and it was a really, really hot day, and they stopped apparently on the way home. They saw a puddle, and they sort of stopped and got some water, put this thing in some mud to get it home. I mean, it's madness, but it's all quite fun. You think, I love this. And there's just some lovely stories. Also, my late uncle was John Treasure of Burford House Gardens. So a lot of the plants came from him, and they spent a lot of their time there. And I started my gardening career there. So I love stories about plants that came from him, because I remember him so well. And he was a character.
I remember Graham and I had to go down to Kidderminster, in actual fact, and I went off to Burford House on my own while Graham was doing whatever he had to do in Kidderminster. Yeah. And I was in John's garden, and he came and spoke to me, and he was so kind. He was such a nice man. We had the most lovely, enjoyable, I suppose, probably an hour's conversation, which I'm sure an hour he could ill spare one with somebody as I was then quite young. But his name always reminds me of a tale of, I think there was him and Christo's mama. They were off visiting a garden somewhere, and they were both mad keen on clematis, as you know. And they espied, I think it may have been even in an RHS garden, but they espied a clematis growing that neither of them had got. And I think Christo related the story something like this. Well, mother kept cavy as I did the deed, and we put it into John's bag very quickly. So it was the kind of story of them nicking a bit, shall we say. And they did. And it grew and it prospered. And I just thought, how funny.
But do you know what's so lovely? You'd love this. Is they've got lots of gardening books at Stockton that belong to John, and you can be flicking through them, and then a letter will fall out, and it's from Beth Chatto or Christo. Yeah. You think, to my uncles, Beth and Christopher Lloyd, they were just friends. They don't see them as like these. We're like, oh God, let me look at the letter, but to them, they're just a private letter that they happen to have. But I don't know. I mean, I remember Christopher Lloyd coming to Stocktonbury when I was really about 16, 17, and I was wearing a ghastly purple jumper. I mean, it was, nearly, no, Thordis is not quite as bright as that, but mine was really as purple as you could be. And I remember Christo saying, oh, I do love your jumper. And I had no idea who he was. And I thought, who would like this jumper? And actually, it was then a couple of years later, I thought, oh, that was Christopher Lloyd. So I've kept that jumper. It's in a moss-proof bag in my wardrobe, just because of that one comment. Madness.
I tell you, one of the things I remember from Burford House was the fact that John, and I'm sure this is very difficult to do successfully, but John used to grow climbing, or even maybe rambler, but I think definitely climbing roses on the flat. And he used to take I don't know whether you remember this, and also with clematis too, he used to train them so that they pegged them along the ground. I mean, it must be do you remember that?
I can't remember the roses. I do remember him growing clematis in the most amazing ways. We can't grow them along the ground at Stocktonbury because we've got too many voles.
I could never understand how the heck it was possible to keep the ground weed free when you're growing you're training climbing roses with thorns and things on the
Yeah.
flat and pegging them down as you go, and then working a clematis through them. How the heck do you keep it weed free? I don't know. But I mean, it was an interesting thought.
You send your 16-year-old niece down to clear the weeds. That's what you do.
It's interesting that obviously your whole relationship with plants and with gardening started very young. I mean, you say being sent down at 16 to weed, but weeding, we all know, is actually quite a precise art, knowing what to weed. So obviously, if you were being sent at quite a young age to weed, you already had a real good knowledge of what tiny little plantlets were.
Yeah, I mean, actually, I have to say, I've said in many garden talks that I do that John Treasure taught me how to weed, and people think, what do you mean you don't need to be taught how to weed? But gosh, he taught me how to weed. So I'd spend the morning on a border and he would come along and sort of point his stick, and it was never good enough. And I get that now because I've turned into that person, and you weeding, if you're growing a lot of plants and it's got to be perfect, it's so important to know what these tiny little weeds look like as they emerge. And it is an art form, weeding correctly, I think. So yeah, I've spent a few years doing it now.
And it's a great, I tell you one thing, another way of looking at weeding is it's a great waste of money if you don't know how to weed, because you're digging up lots of self-sown plants which are worth money, and whether they're worth money where you physically actually sell them. If you have a plant stand or a table when you open your garden, you could put them on there and sell them, or you could give them away, or you could plant them in your own garden and make more of what you have. But it is, it's a great waste if you don't know how to do it properly.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm always looking for free plants.
Yeah, me too. You're talking about all of these sort of fantastical stories, Christopher Lloyd, Beth Chatto, but I mean, you are, I suppose when you're living it, it's hard to appreciate it, but you're kind of continuing that tradition because you're so well connected and you're such a sort of front runner of the horticultural world, that actually, I suppose, really anybody who follows you could easily have the same kind of idea about you and the people you know.
It is it's so lovely of you to say, and I would never dare to be anything like them, but I am actually, this year, since having the book, it's been lovely to have contact with people. I think that's what the book has brought me. Although I see people a lot at the garden, I've had lovely messages from people, especially on social media. I've had nurses saying, I bought your book during the pandemic and it's just taken me to the countryside. And people have said they loved the fact that I mentioned farming in it and it reminded them of their childhood. And that's been really, really special to me, I think. And I wrote the book for my dad, in memory of my dad, who I lost in my early 20s. And to create a book that actually people have enjoyed so much, he would just love that. So that's been really joyous, actually. But you never, when you're at Stocktonbury, my uncles will never let me get big-headed. They're only really happy when I'm pushing a broom. So yeah, don't worry about me. There's only so far I can go.
I mean, I'm really impressed that you managed to find the time to write the book, because as we've seen, it's not like it's a little thin pamphlet. There's this big book that's absolutely full of information. And yet, obviously, you are incredibly busy, not only with the garden, but as I mentioned at the beginning, like all these other roles that you have.
I think I'm quite hyper, if I'm honest. I don't like sitting down. I probably drive my family absolutely to drink. Like last week, I said to them, I've had a really great idea. Let's have a mistletoe sale for charity. And I can see them going, oh no, what's she doing now? Next thing, we're all up trees. We've all got barrows. I'm bunching and we're standing in the cold on Sunday selling it. It's just the way I am. I love to try things, and I just think it's all such good fun.
I feel a bit bad actually, because I know Alan doesn't have an awful lot of it at East Ruston. Wherever I go in Cambridgeshire, everything seems to be festooned in mistletoe, and obviously you've got quite a lot as well, Tamsin.
We have. We've got 2 cider orchards on the farm, and we've got plenty there, but also we're not far from Tenbury Wells, which is like the centre of the universe when it comes to mistletoe. There's normally a mistletoe market, auctions, florists come and buy. So it is, yeah, we're dripping in it, but it's beautiful. I love it. I have to say, I have a real fondness for it. It reminds me of home, and we've always used it as a decoration in the house. So yeah, I've got a little bunch here so we can have little air kisses. And do you know what's made me quite sad is that a lot of people have said, oh, you don't need it this year because we can't kiss. And I think, well, yes, but surely we should be using natural decorations. We're living with our families. Come on, guys, get the mistletoe up. But
what
I
about
love
the seasonality?
And I went to a tour of a beautiful haunted house. I took my son and my husband on a private tour of Helen's Manor in Herefordshire. It's really spooky but beautiful. It's a Tudor property, and they decorated with it. And the lady there was telling us that in the Tudor times, it was a time where everyone was really drunk and joyous and whatever. And the women of the time used to take mistletoe berries as a contraceptive for the Christmas period. I mean, I'm surprised they're still alive. I mean, it's dead, it's poisonous. I thought that was just fabulous. I thought, well, they wouldn't get pregnant because they'd probably be dead. But anyway, so yes, I do love my mistletoe.
What other bits of show and tell have you brought along? I know you've got various things by your screen.
I know my desk it's an old dining room table covered in all sorts of bits and bobs. Now this, I don't know if you can see this very well. This is a clematis. I can never say it right. Rederiana. R-E-H. Yeah, R-E-H-D-E-R-I-A-N-A. And it's on our shed at Stockton. It's got little tiny bells of sort of green flowers, and it has been gorgeous. And it's in group 3, so it needs pruning sort of February time. And I wouldn't want to prune it now. Look at these lovely little seed heads. It's an absolute joy, this clematis. So I thought if anyone wants to cover a wall, a shed, it grows in any aspect. So this is against a north-facing wall. I think it's absolutely a must-have.
I'm so excited.
Tiny little flowers.
I'm so excited that you've talked about this because I really want it, but I was a bit worried about my clay because I'm on clay like you.
Yeah.
So is it okay in your clay?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's going mad. If you don't prune it, you can't get into the shed. I've had to clip a hole to get into the shed several times this year.
We've got one of those growing on one of our chicken runs, and the chicken runs have so shall we say, a 4-foot chestnut paling fence around it. I thought, well, it'll reach the top, I suppose. Reach the top? Come on, guys. We prune this back every year to about 6 inches in spring, in early February, as you say, Tamsin, and it just goes for it. And that's the one thing I would warn you, Thunder, is that it is a very vigorous plant, and as it gets older, it'll get bigger and better if you've got the space for it.
It's a winner. And the other thing, I've stolen this from my uncle's alpine house. That I wonder if they'll miss it. So this is a hepatica that they got from their friend John Massey. And I'm never going to say this right. This is my favorite one. It's Yamatutia, and it's got white flowers in February and a green center. And look, it's got these brilliant buds in the middle waiting. So yeah, those will be an absolute treat. So that's been stolen. It's got to go back or I should be in trouble. And then, do you want my last show and tell? Yes. I could have bought I could have bought the whole garden in. Right, my last one is a particular favourite that we have at Stocktonbury. Now, this is Diacia personata. I don't know if you can see it. And this is the foliage, and it's got these square stems. It's really quite unusual. And it grows really well in Herefordshire, and this has been flowering since June, and it's still flowering. It's for a sunny spot, well drained if you can, and we don't cut it back because it's a perennial, but it's not incredibly hardy. So we leave it shaggy, as we call it, for the winter, and then I'll sort of tidy it up before we open, cut some stems off. But it's absolutely, value for money. It's beautiful.
I do agree with you there. That is a fantastic plant. And of course, with us, with our light soil and our, shall we say, shortage of frost, here it is quite hardy and it grows very, very well. So good is it that when I was going through the propagating house the other day, I was moving, trays around and from weaning them off the warm bench onto an ordinary bench and so on and so forth. And I had some space and I thought, now what can I fill this space with? Because I can't bear it if the propagating house is not earning its money. And so, I went back and I went into the garden and I took another 20 cuttings of Diacia personata because I thought, well, you never have too much of it. Wonderful.
Exactly. No, it's a brilliant plant. I mean, the only fault it has is that it can snap. If you put it too close to a path and it gets knocked, these square stems bend very quick. So put it slightly further back where you're not going to knock it. But no, that's my limited show and tell. I could have bought you a million things, but I thought, no, come on. Be restrained, don't be greedy.
I mean, restraint is not something we're overly familiar with on this podcast, but thank you for bringing it.
Oh, good. Okay.
And the Diacia, you said it likes to be well drained, and obviously you've got your clay soil. So do you do anything extra to it, or do you just sort of put it?
Well, we're always improving the soil. We have got some raised beds, some areas of the garden that are raised, and that's where it grows really well. And the wall along the bottom of the kitchen garden is well drained. So we just got to keep improving the soil. And it seems to be fine with us. It does seem to cope. So thankfully.
See, I'm particularly interested because that's my Flomo. I wrote it down, inspired by seeing it in shots that you put up on Instagram from Stockton Breed.
Really?
Well, it looked, I think because you kind of implied it was this good doer and it flowered for such a long time. I have a tiny suburban garden. I'm always looking for things that will give and give. And also you described it as big billowing mounds, and I'm a big fan of big billowing mounds. So yes. I wanted to be disappointed. I might have to put it in my raised bed because it might resent my claggy soil, which I'm still desperately trying to improve. But it sounded wonderful. So I'm excited you brought it along as one of the things you wanted to show off, because it kind of puts it even higher on my list of Flomo. For anyone who's listening or watching and somehow hasn't come across Flomo before, it's a feeling we're all familiar with. It's that sort of fear of missing out you get when you see a plant that you want to grow in your own garden and you haven't got yet. Tamsin, what's yours? Oh gosh,
do you know, because I spent a lot of time working in Bournemouth Parks Department where there is no frost and the weather is so much better, I really miss cannas. I mean, I know they're not hugely unusual, but you could leave them outside in Dorset and they come up again like massive, great big things. And I'm desperate to grow them. I just miss that sort of tropical foliage. So I am going to invest this year. I'm going to give them a go. And I just want that sort of bananas and, I just want that holiday feeling. So yes, definitely going to invest in some cannas.
Alan, obviously you've got loads of stuff like that at East Ruston. Tropical, exotic.
Yes, well, look at me. My Flomo is, do you remember years ago, the RHS used to put on shows at the Westminster Halls? And I think they used to be Tuesday and Wednesday of the week. And I often used to go up early on a Tuesday morning. And the main reason for that was going up and being one of the first through the doors. And the first thing I used to do is I used to go around, look at all the stalls and look at what they got for sale. Never mind about the plants they were exhibiting. I just wanted to see what they got for sale because they have limited quantities. And, I was still expanding the garden here and getting new plants. And then they had an occasion where the Glasnevin Botanic Garden put on a stand. They didn't have anything for sale, but they put on this stand of plants that were growing in the Botanic Garden at Glasnevin in Ireland. And I remember seeing there a double-flowered cream nasturtium. Now, I don't know whether you're familiar with double-flowered nasturtiums, but they are sterile. They don't make seed, so you have to vegetatively, I got it out, vegetatively propagate them. Try saying that when you've had a drink. It's very difficult. Anyway, We've got Hermione Grassoff, we've got Darjeeling Gold, which I think is rather too vigorous for me. And we have one called Margaret Brown, which is a soft sort of orange colour. But this cream one, there was no label on it. I couldn't find out. There was nobody there to ask. I couldn't find out what it was called. So if anybody anywhere from Alaska to South America, if you know where there is a cream double flowered nasturtium, East Ruston Old Vicarage would love to be the custodian of a plant of it. It just filled me with delight. And do you know, it's one of those times when I stood outside opposite this plant and there was a rope and then a gap and then the stand, and how my hand wanted to creep out and just
Naughty.
but I didn't. I rather wish I had, perhaps now. I've never seen it since. I tried getting in contact with the Glasnevin Botanic Garden, but to no avail, I'm afraid.
Oh, that double nasturtium. Hermione Grassoff is probably the only one I really know, and it's such a little treasure.
Well, I first came in contact with at another great garden in Wales. It was Powers Castle, and there was a wonderful man there who used to be the head gardener called Jimmy Hancock, and Jimmy he used to grow the most wonderful half-hardies and subtropical looking plants. And in the wall, there are two sort of niches with very important terracotta vases in them. And he used to fill these with tropical planting. And I remember seeing Hermione Grassoff tumbling out of this vase and hanging down. You know, we'd be used to things like trailing lobelia and plants like that. And this red thing with double flowers just looked so exotic. It was better than any begonia. And I mean, it is such a wonderful thing. You know, it's just pure excitement, isn't it?
It is. I had one a long time ago and I've lost it. So there you go. I can add that to Diasia on my FLOMO list.
You better put that on the East Ruston Old Vicarage list, because I think I've got a list. Well, I know I've got Dixter Orange for you.
Yeah.
There may be one or two other things as well. So you better start that list and get it over to me by email, and then we'll keep it updated.
I've got like a holding pen of plants at East Ruston Old Vicarage, Tamsin.
I love that. That sounds fabulous. Great.
Before we wind things up, obviously we're right on the cusp of Christmas, and you've got your little Christmas tree there, and I've gone full kitsch with tinsel-tastic staircase. Yeah. I know Alan's not the biggest fan of tinsel. I've almost done it in your honour, Alan. But you know, have you got any things on your wish list for Christmas? Are you hoping for? I mean, obviously we're hoping everyone gets your book for Christmas.
Yes, well, of course. Now, what would I like for Christmas? Oh gosh, I'm as Alan will know if he's read my book, I'm really into thermal underwear. And the other day I put on my son's what do they call it? A skin that you wear for rugby. It's fantastic. And I wore it all day and you could barely prise it off me. I've got to get some of that kit, that sort of rugby underlayer. That's what I want for gardening. That's on top of my list. And everyone's talking about this tool, the Hori Hori, which is like a big knife thing. And I haven't got one of those.
So my list.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure if it's funny with tools, isn't it? The one tool that I use that should be on people's Christmas list is really bizarre. You know, those long-handled wolf tools that you lock the different bottoms in.
Yeah.
So you buy one handle. I've got a little rake. So it's just a little hand rake, and where you lock it into the handle, I use that to dig my dandelions out. So I never have it on a big handle. That is my absolute, I love that tool. So I could do with another one of those because I will lose it this year. It's a given. Oh gosh, what else? And I wouldn't mind. I'd really like some houseplants, but the problem is, this house is either really hot because of the fires or absolutely freezing. And I've got a fern behind me, but I think I might be wasting my money on them. It's really just, that's the difficult thing about having a very old house. It's never sort of consistently, of a temperature where houseplants will thrive. So
I think one thing you should think, as long as they don't freeze, they'll probably be okay. And it's a matter of watering, isn't it? If they're not too wet and they're cold or cool, they should be all right. Do you grow clivias?
Yes, but we've got them at Stockton.
Yeah, but they should grow quite well in your house because they tolerate low light levels. As long as they don't freeze, they'll be fine. They might flower a little bit later, but that doesn't matter. When everybody else has finished, you can say, yes, but look at mine.
Well, I might give that a go. God, I hope they don't freeze in the house. That will just show you. Look, I've got a blanket on my legs, and before I came on, I took my bubble hat off. That's what I'm living like. But it's all an adventure.
Well, thank you, Tamsin. It's been such a treat to hear all about Stocktonbury and the book. We didn't even get to talk about half the other things you do, so you'll have to come back with more show and tell.
No, it's been lovely. Yeah, it's been lovely. Lovely of you to have me. I've thoroughly enjoyed it.
Merry Christmas.
Have a lovely Christmas. Yes.
And you too.
Air kisses to you both. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Do you remember this?
Yes.
You can hear the mice in the floorboards, so they might appear on your podcast.
What's happened to Alan?
We've lost Alan.
Alan's disappeared.
I've bored him. He's gone.
Can you hear us? He looks confused.
Well, yeah, because suddenly you disappeared. I don't know whether it's our connection or what it is.
I think it was you.
Do you know what? I'm very relieved though, because I really need to blow my nose.
So do I, and I was fumbling for a handkerchief and I've forgotten one.